The history that Asian Americans have in the United States has never truly been stable, from the early immigrant merchants and sailors that arrived during the early 1800s to the modern-day Americans. Their view in society as an American has always changed, especially during the rise of World War II after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, causing the uprising of the internment of Japanese Americans 2 months later on February 19, 1942, and ended on March 20, 1946, exactly 4 years of wrongful imprisonment of Americans. It should be noted that although 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned, the government had originally only taken in 3,000 suspects, but after social hysteria grew, the government was pressured to make a larger move. It should also be noted that people such as Attorney General Francis Birtle warned others that the establishment of internment camps would be unconstitutional and a violation of human rights. Yet President Roosevelt still signed Executive Order 9066, which justified internment as an act of national security. Prejudice and social hysteria was the major cause for this decision, as the government enforced internment as a safety measure against espionage, but in fact had no correlation with the evidence. The internment camps were located far from major cities. They were old military bases that had harsh living conditions. Families had to live in cramped quarters and were given poor clothing, food, and medical care. Japanese Americans tried to create their own society with schools, police departments, fire departments, and small stores. Along with the internments came a loyalty test that all Japanese Americans took. In this test, there was a section for young, able men to join the war effort, breaking apart these broken families even more. After the war was over, Japanese Americans were released. It wasn't until 1988 that they were formally apologized to by President Reagan. After the war, many Japanese Americans felt betrayed by their own country, but instead of voicing their anger, they worked hard to gain America's trust. The idea of a model minority started to build. There was a rise in highly educated and wealthy Asian Americans. Following the end of this Japanese internment, the US government implemented a number of immigration laws that affected Asian Americans up until the 1970s. In 1952, the Immigration and Nationality Act ended racial exclusion from immigration, allowing Asians to migrate to the US in larger numbers. However, the law still prioritized immigrants from Western European countries, and Asian immigration was limited to a quota of 2,000 people per year. However, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 finally abolished the quota system and allowed more Asians to migrate to the US. This led to an increase in Asian American population, particularly from South Asian countries such as Vietnam and Cambodia, due to the Vietnam War and the genocide in Cambodia. Despite these changes, discrimination against Asian Americans continued, with laws and policies limiting their access to education, employment, and housing. It was not until the civil rights movement of the 1960s and the 1970s that the Asian American community began to fight back against these discriminatory practices and demand equal treatment under the law. One significant victory for Asian Americans during this time was the 1974 Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court decision, which ruled that schools were required to provide non-English speaking students with appropriate language assistance. This decision was instrumental in securing educational rights for Asian Americans and other non-native English speakers, as it required schools to provide English language instructions to students who need it. Another significant development during this time was the emergence of Asian American activism and advocacy groups, such as the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Asian American Political Alliance, which fought for greater political representation and social justice for Asian Americans. These groups helped to raise awareness of the discrimination faced by Asian Americans, such as Chol Soo Lee, that created a large movement that pushed for changes in laws and policies to address these issues. The grassroots movements that were present before Chol Soo Lee led to a wider Pan-Asian movement in the 1960s to the 1970s.